Terror of Islam is embedded within the teaching of Islam.
The spirit of hatred and killing and slaughter is the spirit of Islam as it is written in the Quran.
Now I have, in one hand I have the Quran, in the other hand I have the AK-47 machine gun. I can change the world.
Islam has a plan to take over the world. They believe very strongly that they are going to create a worldwide ummah, or nation of Islam.
Plainly, the Muslims have a missionary agenda, and governments, Muslim governments like Saudi Arabia, are funding the evangelization of the West through videos, through booklets, through leaflets, and through many other programs.
We're seeing Islamic societies seeking to impose a 7th century Arab worldview on everybody else.
While they all know life was better in the West, they want to destroy the West. Islam is a missionary religion, and just as Christianity has a goal for world evangelism, and just as we have the Great Commission, want to make disciples, teach obedience of all nations to all things that the Lord has commanded, so Islam has its dawah. It has its missionary agenda. It has its focus to want to win the Western nations over to Islam. And in fact, the Muslims are quite confident of the fact that one day they will succeed in doing this.
The goal of Islam is to impose their 7th century cultural values on all other cultures and societies around the world.
Dawah and jihad of martyrism comes hand in hand. One will lead to the encouraging and increasing of Islam. The other one will put the fear and intimidation and destruction.
Jihad could be regarded as a violation of the human rights of other religions and other societies. But under Islam, it's almost like we're doing them a favor by making them Muslims, because they are Muslims and they just don't know it.
They have a worldwide strategy with dawah to use the softer approach of dawah, whereas jihad is war and conflict. Dawah is peace, and they're saying Islam is a peaceful religion.
I grew up rarely hearing anything about peace. It wasn't a subject that we cared about. We were never taught peace as a value.
Dawah it's a doctrine, and it's a Sharia in a way that the Muslim must have that to the whole earth, because the teaching of Islam says that one day there will be nothing left that's from the Quran except Islam.
You become a Muslim, you become a Middle Easterner. You wear their clothes, you wear their beards. If they're a beard, you do exactly what they do. You learn Arabic, because Arabic is the language that they said is of God.
Jihad is my right to convert others.
They have a large number of missionaries working in the United States and in the Western world today.
I was a very devoted Muslim. I took it very serious. I mean, I literally brought others to Islam. I brought converts to Islam. That's how devoted I really became.
When the 9/11 took place, they opened up their mosque and they said, "Come in, we want to talk to you." And they were trying to win individual converts. They were trying to win the neighborhoods so that they would be more open to Islam at the same time that they would also become Muslims.
I was encouraged to have a cross-cultural group in my home, where what I did is I had other American women who were Christian or Muslim, didn't matter. We would meet at my home once a month and talk about our different issues. So that was my focus, and that's what I did for our community.
They are going through the whole country now, and they have people that have been trained to go in and to teach.
And I even had Quran studies in my home on Fridays, or at least once a week, to introduce my neighbors and friends and the other women that were married to the Muslim men that had not come over into Islam, to teach them.
Within 6 months, After 9/11, there were between 30 and 40,000 Americans that converted to Islam because every mosque that I know of immediately had open houses. They were saying Islam is a misunderstood religion. This is very simply a part of their dawah and their attempt to try to shed a much more positive light on Islam.
There were focuses on reaching people in prisons.
Going through the prison system, they meet this man and they lead him to Islam, and now they go and meet his family. While the man is over there not knowing what's happening, now they are leading his family over there. They tell him, your husband is a Muslim now, everybody should follow. They start taking off the family and lead the family to Islam. Now they don't work the family, they start working the cousins, the uncles, the aunts, the nephews, the grandmothers, and the grandfather. They start inviting them to the house to come and listen about dawah of Islam.
So they're working very hard with the Hispanics in America today. They're also working with the Native Americans, the Indians, and being somewhat successful in reaching, beginning to reach Native Americans. So you can drive through Gallup, New Mexico, which is considered the Indian capital of the world, and there on the main road is a large mosque. And I asked people, why do you have a mosque in Gallup, New Mexico? And they said, well, there's a few Muslims here. I said, but it's far larger than the few Muslims you have. Well, yes. But the reason is that they are building it with the expectation that once the mosque has been built, people will come, particularly as they continue to do their dawah and trying to bring people into their faith.
Even hospitals and things they have in the interfaith chapels where they have Islamic services going on there, reaching out.
We are seeing the systematic infiltration of our society from university campuses, from mosques, from our borders. And this is why we are very concerned about the borders, where people are coming into the society and infiltrating it on every level, including government offices, and they are taking government jobs. They have learned how to get into the culture.
Dawah must take place by all Muslims to go to knock on doors and seek people in high school, universities, and any other places.
They're actually raising up drug and alcohol centers to help these people get off drug and alcohol through Islam by teaching them about the Islamic faith.
They adapt to every atmosphere they go to. If it's an academic atmosphere, they bring academics to deal with it. If it's jails, they bring preachers who are fitted to jail atmosphere. If they are preaching to the general public, they bring people who blend with the general public in America.
They're not leaving any stones unturned. They are going after all of these different areas.
Saudi Arabia has been able to exploit a program called Title VI program that was founded by our government after World War II to influence minds in the United States and to educate American citizens about other cultures and have them learn languages of other cultures so they can be an asset to our country. About 20 years ago, Saudi Arabia, with the wealth of the oil, started exploiting that program and setting up Middle East study departments and political science departments and appointing Arab chairs who were pro-Palestinians, pro-Arabism, and anti-Americanism and anti-Semitism. So they started brainwashing our future generation, our American children, who go to the university to get an education, started teaching them false history based on those anti-American ideas and anti-American professors.
I came to this land, to America, for the purpose to cut her feet off from under her. How do you do this? You take her choicest people, her children. You teach them Islam, and you bring them in the ways of Islam, and you impact their students in universities and high schools, and you teach them the ways of Islam, and now these are the leaders. These are the future of this country.
6 years ago, Michigan, Detroit, Ford Street, they opened a high school. They brought a speaker from Washington, Muslim speaker. He says, now we have enough money, enough men, enough mobility to change this country to a Muslim country. And and we hope that Michigan will be the first Muslim populated country, state. And the best thing of it, we already started. So they came on a purpose. How they're going to do it? This is the question. Don't think it's going to be peaceful way of process.
Every 5.5 days, according to statistics, a new mosque or Muslim center is open in the United States of America. Today they have over 45 public schools, they have over 120 curriculums, and they have total over 400 schools throughout the United States of America which teaches Islamic teaching, which is Islam is religion of peace. Islam is a religion of love. It's just to change the culture of the United States of America.
I did all the promotional work for all these once-a-year meetings, and then of course the monthly meetings. I also did all the promotional work for that, so I was kind of their upfront spokesperson. I even did some radio spots at times. I wrote the copyright work, the work. We would reach out to the community, and it was a way of introducing the culture. We had cultural things. We'd even have like displays, or they would have the displays of the Arab culture, and even simple things like art and pottery and the clothes and the dress and the food. So it was a way of introducing the culture into the American culture in our city.
I was in Morocco one time, and I was speaking to a class of students, and they were learning English. And so I said, "Why are you learning English?" And they said, "We're learning English so that we can convert the West to Islam." They are training young people, primarily young people, many times business people, to come and to be those that are trying to further the Islamic faith.
The other thing I did for our community that I was encouraged to do through the mosque was I was in charge or on the board of the American Arab Women's Society, and we had once a year this incredible talent search for all the children community-wise. And then Islam was brought in subtly there, because you would see the women in the covers and the different things like that, and then the children would do whatever talent or thing that they had. Of course, everything was viewed. You couldn't be in skimpy clothes, and it was all according to the Islamic dress code. But that was one of our ways to reach out in our city to the women and the children of the area.
They know exactly how to use our laws to their benefit, such as freedom of press, such as freedom of religion.
I've seen such an aggression towards evangelism. The Muslims evangelizing America strongly on college campuses.
The Muslim Student Unions are very active on every college campus. There is one almost on every college campus in the United States.
A lot of the marriages are taking place on the college campuses. These young guys are coming over here, meeting the girls. There you go, the dawah through marriage.
There is a recruitment of the most radical Muslim students to come to United States campuses.
When America was invading Afghanistan, there were 3 American students that they were fighting with Al-Qaeda, that they were fighting with Mujahideen against America. These were American students recruited right here in the United States of America in the name of Dawah.
In San Francisco, I heard chants by Muslim students who were chanting in Arabic on the streets of San Francisco. Khaybar Khaybar ya Yahud, Jaysh Muhammad Saifa Yaud. They were reminding the Jews the army of Muhammad is coming back again.
When Muslim student associations march in the streets reminding the Jews of Khaybar that they're going to kill them.
They can come and tell you that in our mosques we are allowed to teach that Jews are apes and pigs because they are cursed by Allah, because this is what our Quran says. How can you argue with that? We should have the freedom to educate our children in our religion.
We were just having a peace rally. Across the street were Arabs chanting. These young men were having the bands of the martyrs, the green bands with Islamic verses on them, chanting 2, 4, 6, 8. We are martyrs. We can flee. Right here in California.
We have freedom of religion in our country. And this is how they are able to teach hatred in the name of religion.
Just to show where our loyalty belongs to, You see this flag here? It's going to go on the floor. And to us, our loyalty does not belong to this flag. Our loyalty belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Takbir! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
They are bringing the ideology that I escaped from in the Middle East. The same hatred, the same anti-Semitism, the same victimhood.
So what we ended up with today is basically a generation that is brainwashed in our universities, brainwashed by our media elites, which basically are the graduates of those universities that now hold positions in the media, who are spewing and becoming the talking points and the talking heads on behalf of professors who were anti-America to begin with, anti-Jewish to begin with, and now they are influencing the opinion of the next generation coming up.
Today, the Muslims are trying to go into every level of government to impact that country.
The American congressman who put his hand on the Quran and not the Bible, he meant to send a message to both the Islamists, we're winning, and to the American people that we are here. We are here to stay, and this is just the beginning.
When Westerners say, let's give concessions to Islam, let us allow them to even swear on the Quran instead of the Bible. They're Muslims. What they're doing is this. They're telling the Islamists that you're winning. The Quran has become a formidable and acceptable constitution to be sworn on in the West. Islam already is entering into the West. That's the message, the way they see things.
And what people do not realize in the United States and in Western countries is a Muslim can lay his hand on the Quran and lie, knowing that he is telling a lie, and knowing that he will be forgiven by this same Quran if he lies, because as long as he is advancing the cause of Islam, he is forgiven in the name of Islam.
Anytime when you have a senator or anyone in our government putting his hand and swearing on the Quran, he's making allegiance, his promises of Allah for Quran, and it is not for that country.
I remember when Muhammad got his citizenship. He had his green card when we married, so I know he didn't marry for the green card. But when he got his citizenship, I remember asking him when we walked out, I said, what would you do if there was a war that broke out between Syria and the United States on American soil? Who would you fight for? And he told me Syria without a doubt, after he got his American citizenship.
A Muslim's loyalty when it comes to war will be only to Islam and not to a country. His duty is to Islam and not to his country nor to his family. It is solely for Islam.
When a Muslim is swearing on the Quran, what is he saying? Give us the right path. Not the path of the ones who are cursed, the Jews, okay? وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ, the ones who went astray, the Christians. The text doesn't use Jews and Christians, but when you look at Al-Jalalain or any Quranic interpretation you can find, you will see the interpretation of this verse is don't give us the constitution of the unrighteous, who are the lost ones, the Jews and and went astray, the Christians.
In England today, in their parliament, the only people who can worship in the parliament are the Muslims. The Hindus, the Jews, the Christians, the Sikh, none of them can worship in the parliament. Only the Muslim can worship. They are changing this throughout. They're doing it in Canada. They're doing it even in the United States of America. Supreme Court trying to bring a Muslim judge to put him in power in the United States of America.
I'm worried about this element that calls itself moderate and is seeking policymakers to change our legislation and our government to ease up on the movement. That's the danger.
CAIR is a group called Council of American Islamic Relations, and they consider themselves as a moderate Muslims. So many people say, what's the moderate Muslim are doing? Well, these people, the CAIR group allowed the Muslim to be in government, militaries, and many other places.
Council of American Islamic Relations started in America born from an organization before it called the IAP, Islamic Association of Palestine. Islamic Association of Palestine was born by the Hamas movement in the Palestinian areas. The IAP, which gave birth to CARE, was a Hamas terror apparatus in America that was fundraising for the terrorists literally in America, using the Muslim community, using American money, donations here, to send to the recruitment of jihadists and the terrorists over there.
Many Muslim organizations, in the name of charity, are raising funds to funnel it to terrorist organizations, what we would consider terrorist organizations, but they consider human rights organizations in the Middle East, such as Hamas, such as Al-Qaeda, such as Islamic Jihad, such as Hezbollah. They're raising the money here under the cover of a human rights organizations or charity organizations and sending it over to the Middle East or even to this country to commit terrorist operations.
Even the translators in our government are compromising what they're doing for the sake of Islam because they're working between the spies that they're captured and between the other Islamic areas.
They are using our laws because of their knowledge of our laws. They have attorneys who are educated in American schools and Western schools, who graduated from law schools in the West, who know the laws of the West and are able to find the loopholes to advance their cause against us to topple our society.
An apparatus calls itself, or a facade of Muslim moderates. When organizations like the American Muslim Council or the American Muslim Society will condemn terrorism verbally and in reality aid and abet the terrorist movement itself in all their speeches in the Arabic language.
But we in our multicultural society and our tolerance are allowing prejudice to exist and allowing those Muslims to use our own laws to push their own agenda in our society.
When a Muslim reach about 10%, they control the economy of the country. When they reach 20%, they control the government.
Because the West took a back seat and refused to attack Hitler and silence him, Hitler's force grew so big that it dragged the superpowers of the world into war and cost the world 60 million lives. Hitler got into the churches, started brainwashing students, and started brainwashing them through universities and through churches, and started taking students and teaching them to hate Jews, started forbidding Jewish students from attending universities, and justified it in the churches as it is okay to forbid Jews.
This is the jihad, purpose jihad, to do the ethnic cleansing, physical ethnic cleansing in Europe against Jews and Christians. So now it's happening with the Jews, the next is going to happen with the Christians.
Well, when I was a kid, I asked, one time I was only 7, at school, when we were reciting jihadist poetry against Jews. I went very innocently, I went to my teacher and said, why do we hate Jews? The teacher immediately, her face changed, she looked very angry at me, and she looked at me and she said, aren't you a good Muslim? I immediately felt ashamed, just by asking the question. So shaming is a very strong aspect of the upbringing of Arab children.
Somehow in the name of Islam, they claim to have higher standards than the Christians. I've regularly heard, we are more Christian than the Christians, we are more Jewish than the Jews. And there's a tremendous pride in Islam. Oh, ye Muslims are the best of peoples, evolved for all of mankind. And the Muslims are very proud and are convinced that they are superior in every way.
22 Arab countries have worked so hard for many decades to make life impossible for Israel to exist.
This idea that somehow Jerusalem is the capital of the Palestinian people is a very recent political origin. And this was started by Yasser Arafat, who used this as a political motivation. It has no historical foundation, it has no historical basis whatsoever in Islamic history.
The Muslims cannot accept the fact that Jews who are considered najis, just like animal and feces, are living on Muslim land, which is in the Middle East, what they used to consider as Arab land.
On Fridays, every Arab and Muslim hear the Friday prayer. And I grew up with hearing cursing.
ونحن نقطعها والله لا نقطعها أيها اليهود.
Cursing of Jews, Christians, pagans, Europeans, Americans, infidels, everybody who's not a Muslim is being cursed at the end of every Friday prayer in the Middle East.
The Muslims see the West very much as the great Satan, as pagan, degenerate, corrupt, wicked, evil.
Our jihad is against the great Satan and the small Satan. The greatest Satan is America. They are the head of the serpent. The small Satan is Israel.
Islam hates America because America is the largest Christian nation on earth. Islam hates America because America is the main sponsor of Christian missionary activity worldwide. Islam hates America because America is more successful than any Muslim country on the planet. And according to the Quran, that's not possible, and it shouldn't be. And according to Muhammad, Muslim nations should be the top. They should be the head, not the tail. And how is it possible that America is greater in terms of industry and inventions and technology and work ethic and the economy?
I hated America. I was trained to hate America by that time because we believe that America is behind all the evil that the Jews are doing.
Today they're damaging and destroying churches and destroying, synagogues on purpose to intimidate the enemies. The French government didn't do anything about it. The Jews are moving out of France and Germany and out of all those areas, even England. They're afraid that the Muslim going to kill them sooner or later. These are jihad against the Muslim, against the Christian and Jew in Europe.
Some Belgian missionaries were having their heads chopped off in Morocco for proselytizing, winning Muslims to Christianity back in the 1980s. At the same time, Belgium, with taxpayers' money, was building mosques and Islamic propagation centers in Belgium for them.
Whether other people come to the United States of America to be part of the American culture, to learn and to have the freedom. The Muslims are coming here to bring Sharia law, to bring their own culture, to invade our world with their culturalism, Islamic culturalism, and understanding of way of living, and they will not abide in our laws.
Sharia law is the most brutal law on earth. It discriminates against non-Muslims, against women, against, it has cruel and unusual punishment, amputation of limbs, beheading, flogging, and stoning of women. Such laws are not compatible with the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States.
Under Sharia law, women do not have the right to own property. No Muslim may be under the authority of a non-Muslim, so no non-Muslim can own property, may inherit things, or have a position of authority in economics, business, in any area over a Muslim. That's Sharia law.
Sharia law, it goes in such depth, that if men and women still beaten up to death, stoned to death in the city center, or whipped to death sometime in the city center, or your hand cut off and seared with hot oil right there after they chop your hand off because you stole or because you committed something on one end or another. And it's happening also in Iran. And it's happening also, we hear, part of Indonesia and part of the Philippines, where the Muslims are very strong in those areas.
Islam is Islam, whether you are in the Arab world or in America. The only difference is the American Constitution can protect people, can protect Muslims in America.
Muslims will not abide in this because they want to change the American law to their law specifically, where we must raise the fund and the finances to the Muslim cause.
And I've challenged Muslims saying, but don't you realize when you move to America or when you move to Britain, you're taking in your backpack the very seeds of the destruction of why you want to move to those countries, because the very religion of Islam that you take there to bring your children up in will one day destroy that country and deprive you of the same freedoms and opportunities and prosperity which have led you to want to immigrate from this Muslim country to that once Christian nation?
Please understand, people aren't migrating to Muslim countries. The Muslims today are fleeing by the millions to Europe, to England, to America, to New Zealand, to Australia, to South Africa. They're trying to get away from Islam because they understand the enslavement that Islam brings upon women and a society.
When America was attacked in Pearl Harbor, the nation came together and said, we must act and we must act now. And we knew Japan. You didn't hear about any innocent Japanese. You didn't hear Americans saying, well, what did we do to make Japan attack us? That idea never crossed the mind of any American. It was, we're going to act, and we're going to act now, and we're going to act decisively and strongly and crush our enemy. And this is what we need to do today.
How extraordinary that things have changed since Pearl Harbor to such an extent that we can have, over 60 years later, we can have now America falling over itself to embrace and support and protect the Islamic religion, which has inspired the terrorist bombings and the suicide bombers that have taken so many innocent American lives and embroiled America in such costly wars and activities. And yet somehow or another, there are those who want to divorce the religion that has inspired the suicide bombers of Islam, divorce the religion from the terrorism.
It is our duty to get educated, to be informed. So when we hear people like me and other experts saying we must act decisively and we must act now, people do not look at us and say, oh my God, they're so radical. How can they say that? We know so much. This is why we're saying that.
Democracy came out of the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. And one of the things the Protestant Reformation brought was the understanding of the priesthood of the believer. That each man was now individually responsible before a holy God. No longer did we have to go through a centralized government control like the Catholic Church or some other authoritative structure. But one of the great things that the Protestant Reformation brought was the biblical understanding of the priesthood of the believers, that each man is individually responsible. This is what then brought about the whole concept of democracy, of one man, one vote, and that each person in a democracy is individually responsible.
In Saudi Arabia today, you don't see any churches, you don't see any synagogues. You know, the only people who lives over there must be a Muslim. You cannot even wear a cross. If you go to the airport, they rip the cross out of your neck and it's thrown in a fiery box where they melt all this stuff. Right there at the airport as you enter.
In all Arab countries, they are ruled by strong men or despots who rule as authoritative leaders. They lay down the rule because this was the rule of 7th century Arabian tribal life.
That every Arab dictator is afraid of the Islamists because they have no respect for the legitimacy of any government, and no Muslim government is Muslim enough for them.
Democracy only functions where you have a Protestant biblical worldview.
If moderate Islam could be successful, and if moderate Islam that has a place of acceptance of Christianity and accepts other faiths and says that other faiths can live together, then I think there would be some hope that Islam and Christianity could possibly live together. But I don't see that as being a very realistic possibility at this particular point.
The second and third generation in England.
Yeah, I'm British born, British bred. I'm willing to kill British soldiers simply because of the fact that they're engaging in a war that is against my brethren.
Of young men and women calling for Sharia law and calling for Ummah to live under that culture, and they're denying the English law. They're against the English law, and now they want the Muslim law. These are second and third generation. So it's not changing.
Appeasement is surrender on the installment plan. Appeasement is buying time until the day you die, because your enemy is going to kill you at the end anyway.
Their time will come, like every other evil person's time will come.
The world tried to appease Hitler. The world gave Hitler Czechoslovakia. They thought, you know, now he's happy, he'll stay away from us. It only bought Hitler time before he declared his wrath and his evil. to spread not only all over Europe, but all over the world. Because Hitler ended up dragging the whole world into war. And because the world turned a blind eye to evil in the beginning and appeased Hitler, the whole world had to pay the price and go to World War II.
Also available from Carroll Productions, The New Barbarians, training children to kill. Shocking, informative, eye-opening. It offers deeper insight into Islam's plan for world domination. To purchase this and other informative resources, visit carrolltv.com.
Terror of Islam is embedded within the teaching of Islam.
The spirit of hatred and killing and slaughter is the spirit of Islam as it is written in the Quran.
Now I have, in one hand, I have the Quran, in the other hand, I have the AK-47 machine gun. I can change the world.
Islam has a plan to take over the world. They believe very strongly that they are going to create a worldwide ummah, or nation of Islam.
Plainly, the Muslims have a missionary agenda, and governments, Muslim governments like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, are funding the evangelization of the West through videos, through booklets, through leaflets, and through many other programs.
We're seeing Islamic societies seeking to impose a 7th century Arab worldview on everybody else.
While they all know life is better in the West, they want to destroy the West.
Islam is not just simply a religion per se, but it's a social life, a political structure, a governmental structure, a constitution, as well as a personal faith.
Islam is how you regard your leadership, how you look at your family, how you look at yourself, how you dress, how you get married, what are the laws that you have to abide to, what you eat.
Islam becomes a way of life right from childhood as you grow up in the Middle East. And you go to school and you become very educated in reading Quranic recitations at a very young age. It's part of the history education, social life, social studies, Arabic language.
It is a political system, it's a social system, and it's a very complex and detailed legal system.
Islam is the deification of 7th century Arab culture. And what Muhammad did was he took the culture around him and the laws that existed in 7th century Arabia and he turned them into a religion.
Sharia law is Islamic law. It's law according to the Quran and the Hadith. The Quran is meant to be the words of Allah, as apparently dictated to Muhammad, supposedly. The Hadith are the sayings and the actions of Muhammad. So The Hadith and the Quran are perceived both as holy books, as authoritative books, and as sources for Islamic law. Sharia law is the application of the teachings of Muhammad and the example of Muhammad.
Sharia law is the law that basically governs Islam, and it is really the codification of the Hadiths and the Quran and how a Muslim is to live out the Islamic teachings.
Under Islamic Sharia law, no constitution is above Sharia.
Muslims are forced to practice this constitution and are obliged to make the whole world dominated by this constitution.
Islam at its heart doesn't believe in a separation of powers, doesn't believe in the rule of law, it doesn't believe in equality before the law, equality of women, all the way through to religious freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of speech.
In the West, if you have an English 101, you go to school and you study English. In the Middle East, you have Arabic 101. You don't simply study Arabic per se, the language, or the grammar of the language. All Islamic religion is infused in the grammar, infused as examples in history, infused in every single aspect of life.
It is a law which is direct every aspect of your life, even how to go to the bathroom.
The way you eat Islamically. The way you wash your body, yourself. You take a bath. You get married. The way you conduct your social life, a daily aspect, everything in your life really becomes Islam.
How to put the clothes on, how to take the clothes off, how to brush your teeth, how to address your husband, how to address your children, how to address your parents.
Sharia law states that no Muslim should be killed for killing a kafir. No Muslim should be punished even for killing a kafir, meaning an unbeliever.
Kafir is walking by. He went inside. You catch him. What are you doing here? Then he's a good. You can sell him the market. If Muslims cannot take them to the and sell them in the market, then you just kill them. It's okay.
The infidels in Islamic teaching and understanding are the Jews and the Christians. Islam came specifically to fight against these two and declare them false, and to correct them and bring them to Islam. And if they don't, they will kill them.
Islam becomes superior. Our duty becomes to establish an Islamic hegemony throughout the whole globe, in which Islam and Muslims are dominant and all non-Muslims are subservient. You see this essence in every single sermon, speech that you hear from the pulpits.
I hear it all the time in mosques across the Middle East. We are conquering Europe, we are conquering America.
Islam is a religion of submission, and that is what we see wherever Islam goes. They seek to subjugate, they seek to force to surrender, they seek to force into submission other peoples.
We have Sufi against Wahhabi, Naqshbandi against Hanbali, or Sunni against Shiite, because these are all our tribal things. Who's on my side and who is against me? These are all coming from the Bedouin desert mentality of our time. The Sunnis are coming together and joining Al-Qaeda to fight the Shias. And the Shias are doing the same thing, coming together to fight the Sunnis.
The Shiites and the Sunnis will differ on a few small details, but by and large, they are the same.
This is from beginning of time. The Muslims fought each other. Right there, Muhammad fought his own people.
The word Islam means subjugation, submission, or surrender. A Muslim is one who submits.
Many of the Muslims, when they go into Mecca today, they're confiscating their Quran, right there in the border, at the airport, taking their Quran and destroying it with fire and giving them Wahhabi Quran. If your Quran is not lined up with the Wahhabi understanding, then your Quran is not sufficient. Saudi Arabia trying to change everything to Wahhabism.
Wahhabi is a theology that was developed in the 1700s by a teacher named Wahhabi. And he was very, very conservative. And so when you look at the Saudi Arabia approach to religion today, it is Wahhabi faith, Wahhabi belief. Wahhabism is Sunni Islam. And it is one of the strongest aspects of Islam today. And the Wahhabis have been accepted by the royal family of Saudi Arabia. And the World Muslim League is a Wahhabi tool. And that's the one that has their strategy for worldwide conquest, that 80% of the mosques in the United States are Wahhabi mosques, which means that they are radical mosques.
The tribe that Muhammad was born into, his tribal deity that they were devoted to was the moon god known as Allah. That is why you find today, on top of every mosque, every minaret around the world, you find a crescent moon. Allah was a pagan moon deity, a 7th century tribal deity. And what Muhammad did was he went into Mecca and told the other Arabs that they were to destroy their tribal deities and to make his tribal deity, Allah, the moon god, which was part of the Sabian religion that had been worshipped for hundreds of years before his birth, that he was to make Allah, the moon god, the supreme deity of Arabia.
Muhammad reigned in Mecca for 11 years.
When Prophet Muhammad got his words from the angel Gabriel in Mecca, when he decided that he is going to be the last prophet, he started quoting scriptures from the Old Testament, from the people of the book, saying good things about the Bible because he wanted to recruit the Jews and the Christians at the time to accept him as the last prophet.
He said, I'm the final prophet. You know, follow me. He declared himself by himself that he is prophet.
When the Jews refused to accept him, he went to Medina, asking them to accept him. And this is when we see all the good verses about the Jews in the Quran, the first verses about the Jews, the people of the book, the Christians and the Jews, and all the nice things.
When he came in the beginning, his message was a loving message. And after he realized, you know, he only got about 70 to 80 men at most that they were following him. In all those years, what he did is he took Islam from peace to jihad.
Once he got to Medina and the Jews refused to accept him, this is when Prophet Muhammad declared war on them and started massacring them.
When he went to Medina, he leaned onto jihad, and 60% today of the Islamic teaching is about jihad. He changed the surface, you know, of that the desert and that side of the world by jihad, by the sword.
And this is when all the verses of the Quran started being against Jews, to kill the infidels, to smite them over the necks and cut off all their fingers and toes because they disobeyed Allah. This is when he killed the Jews, drove them out, and took their properties and their women as booty.
So Islam forced jihad on many of the places that they invaded. They invaded those places by the sword and changed it by the sword as jihad.
When you read the Quran, the holy book of Islam, there are 114 chapters called surahs.
The Quran is not chronological. In other words, it's not the first section is Mecca and the second section is Medina, but they're mixed in. They're mixed in, and you have to know which is a Medina and which is a Mecca.
When you see Muslims, talking heads on American television nowadays, quoting you all the good verses of the Quran, they are not quoting you that there's a law in Islam called the law of abrogation.
A theory of abrogation that is well known in the Muslim world, and that says that any later revelation is superior to an earlier revelation. Therefore, the Meccan Quran is inferior to the Medina Quran.
Everything that Muhammad did after he left Mecca and went to Medina, this is when, you know, the new Nasakh took place. And Nasakh is what new dictated what the old, you know, so the jihad overrode the peace. And now it was message of jihad.
The Medina Quran takes precedent over the Meccan Quran, and that this is the real face of Islam.
As soon as the Jews and Christians turned against Muhammad and rejected him as a prophet, you see this radical shift take place in the Quran.
The Meccan Quran is one that speaks softly about people who are not Muslims. And it says you should respect them, you should honor them, and things like that. By the time he went to Medina, he began to speak from a position of strength. And this is when he was saying, kill the infidels, cut off their arms, cut off their legs. And he began to take a totally different position.
If there are two verses in Islam that contradict each other, it is the latter verse that is the verse that is to be believed, and it wipes out the first verse.
He begins to receive a variety of revelations that he was to exalt Islam above all other religions, He then received revelations that he was to loot and steal from the caravans. He then turned against the Jews.
And this is when he started preaching to all his followers to kill the Jews. He went back, he conquered Medina. He went back and fought his own people and took over Mecca. And from that point forward, all the following verses of the Quran are against the Jews, hate to the Jews, calling the Jews najis. It's an Arabic word. Najis in Arabic means feces, bodily fluid.
So he came with a new message, Aslim Taslim. So when he sent his messengers to one place, said, and the message was, is Aslim Taslim. If you submit to Islam, then you are safe. And if you don't, then we're going to come and change your world.
If they have two faces, they present one face in the Western world and one face in the area where they're dominant.
This is what happened when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad sent the 14-page letter to the United States of America. This is when Al-Qaeda, bin Laden, sent the same, similar letter to our president, and both letters says, in one way, become Muslim or we're coming against you with a sword. And after they sent that, they did 9/11.
They have these 5 books, and they believe that all 5 of these books were ordained by God. But those that were written later are more important than those that were written earlier. They have the 5 books of Moses. They have the Psalms of David. They have the Injil, which is the Gospels. And then they have the Quran, and then they also have the Hadith, which are the sayings of Muhammad.
Muhammad received a revelation while in Medina that Islam must be exalted above all other religions. And he said that there are 5 pillars of faith that every Muslim must follow.
And the Shiites and the Sunnis and all of the other groups all have this same belief system. And that is the 5 pillars of Islam. Now, the 5 pillars of Islam is something that every Muslim must participate in. The first of the pillars is the declaration of God.
That every Muslim must repeat, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet.
In Islam, if a person wants to become a Muslim, they have to stand before their mosque, and as they stand before their mosque, they say, we believe that there is one God, his name is Allah, and his prophet is Muhammad. Now, once this statement is made, then that means that a person is a Muslim. It's a statement of belief.
The Bible says that we could have our sins forgiven. And for a Muslim, they cannot know the forgiveness of sin. For the Muslim, they are told that they must pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. Now, the reason a Muslim prays 5 times a day facing Mecca is because in Islam they say that man is not a sinner, but man is merely forgetful. And so a Muslim will pray 5 times a day to help him to remember to do the laws and the commands of Allah. You see, for a Muslim, he cannot know God in a personal relationship.
Islam really means submission. And you see the Muslims bowing down. You will notice that there are 3 different areas of the human body that come in contact with the ground. First of all, the knees come in contact, and that means that their going is submissive to God. The second one is when their palms of their hands come into contact with the ground, that means their doing is submissive to God. And then they touch their forehead to the ground, and that means that their thinking is submissive to God. So in their prayer, they do this 5 times. And what they need to do is they need to face Mecca. And so if they're not in a mosque, if there's no mosque or Islamic center close by, then they will just put out a carpet anywhere, whether it's in the airport or on the side of the street, and they will pray 5 times a day.
It's not only important praying 5 times a day, but that you do your prayers on time, because there's an allotted time for each prayer.
When they pray, it is very, very well defined. It's defined as to how they sit. It's defined on how often they have to bow down. It's defined as to what they say.
To do your prayers, they don't count if you pray them in English. So you have to pray them in Arabic.
They say the same thing over and over again, and they have to do this 5 times.
There's 5 prayers that you pray every single day in Islam, or 5 times a day you pray. There's actually 17 prayers out of the 5 times. The first one is in the early morning before the sun comes up. Then you have a prayer before noon or right around noon. Then you have one several hours after that. Then after the sun goes down, and then a final prayer before midnight.
The third thing that's required of all Muslims is almsgiving. This is usually 2.5% at the end of the year. Muslims do not give alms to the poor at the end of the year out of any overwhelming love or charity. They do this to gain merit and favor with God, hoping that this will gain them favor to entrance to heaven. The fourth thing that is required of all Muslims is the Feast of Ramadan, or the Fast of Ramadan. This is the 9th month of the lunar calendar. And it's interesting that Muslims use the lunar calendar because of Allah being the moon god. And so Ramadan changes, but it's a 1-month fast where they cannot eat or drink from sunrise until sundown.
In this month of fasting, from the time that they see the first sliver of the moon to the time that they can no longer see the moon during a particular month, and they have a different calendar than we do, so it's not always in the spring or the fall. It changes, it's progressively different. They do not eat, they do not drink, they do not have sexual activities. There are several other limitations that they have, that they may not do these things during this month, during the daytime. At nighttime, they're free from that.
And as soon as the sun set, the restaurants would open, and people during Ramadan would eat, drink as much as they could late into the night. And they call this the fast of Ramadan for a month. The fifth thing that is required of all Muslims is at least once in their life to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. And during this period of time, this week, they will go there to the Kaaba. They'll march around a cubicle building with a black drape on it. They'll march around 7 times. At one end of the cube, there will be a silver chalice. In the center of that silver chalice is a black meteorite. And it's interesting, you have all these astral, they'll march around 7 times. At one end of the cube, there will be a silver chalice. In the center of that silver chalice is a black meteorite. And it's interesting, you have all these astral symbols that they worship. They seek to kiss that astral black meteorite. They will then go outside the Kaaba, and there will be a mad rush of millions of people as they pick up stones to stone 3 pillars that are set up, believing they're stoning Satan and getting rid of their sins. And then they go up to the cave where Muhammad claimed to have received these revelations from this messenger of light. And over a period of time that became known as the Quran. They then go out to a field, and they'll stand in a field all day in the hot sun there and do a variety of rituals, believing that this will gain them entrance into paradise. All Muslim scholars agree that this was something that already pre-existed prior to Muhammad's birth, when they had set up in the Kaaba the 360 tribal deities, each tribe worshiping a different god. And Muhammad, in order to seek to gain the favor of the business community there in Mecca, simply incorporated much of 7th century Arabia and their practices into Islam and turned it into a religion.
If you do not abide by the 5 pillars, then you are in danger of hellfire.
If you were to perform all the 5 pillars of Islam in the Confession of Faith, all those 5 pillars all your life, the top pillar of Islam is jihad.
Jihad is the 6th pillar of Islam, and jihad is the 2nd greatest commandment of Muhammad. Jihad is considered the chief meritorious act in Islam.
The way to understand the Quran, you must go to how Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, interpreted. Once you do this, there is no escape. It's all about jihad by the sword.
The doctrine of Islam is really a system which is wanted to dominate the whole world. And the big proof to it is, go to chapter 9 of the Quran, the holy book of Islam. You'll find that it's only, the whole chapter is nothing but of a declaration of war against the whole world. Actually, the seal of the Quran, that means the last verse ever written in the Quran, is in chapter 9, verse 5, where it says, seize them, ambush them, kill them till there will be nothing but Allah's religion.
Jihad is holy war. There's actually 8 different forms of jihad.
Jihad has value because once they're able to be successful in one jihad somewhere around the world, they will use intimidation to try to intimidate people and saying, we will do more damage in the name of jihad. So jihad, which means holy war, is holy war.
When I was a little boy, I used to run and write on the walls, Christian neighbors, a statement says, غَيْرُ مَرْغُوبِ بِكُمْ, you are not accepted. And with this one, the Christians are in the minority in the neighborhood. And now, you are fighting and intimidating, you know, your enemy with words. Now they become into fear what's going to happen to them next. And now you subdue them and you tell them what you want them to do. Now they give them finances to be protected, just like a mafia style. They are either moving away to move to, you know, Western world, or move to more Christian, you know, areas are filled with Christian. And by this, what you're doing is you're expanding Islam in such a way that that your enemy are on the run.
Jihad, the way we were taught, is through several activities. It could be through war, through violence, through the sword.
Jihad of finances, jihad of self, jihad of invasion, jihad of cleansing, jihad of war.
The ultimate goal of jihad is to convert non-Muslims into Islam.
The Muslims don't see themselves as terrorists. They see themselves as liberators, because the Quran and the Hadith said, you know, that one day there will be nothing left except Islam.
So there's 8 forms of jihad, but the one we're mostly concerned about is the jihad of the sword. Forcible subjugation of the enemies of Islam by the point of the sword, violent revolution and oppression.
Even in the Quran it says, if you don't fight, Allah will replace you with better Muslims who will fight for Him, and Allah will be with you.
My father was trying to recruit Fidaiyin. Fidaiyin means jihadists against Israel, armed resistance against Israel. It was done by the Egyptian government in the open. It wasn't an underground activity. It was in the open. It was Arab policy against Israel.
You still have to fight. They will take your children, and your children will have to go to the Muslim jihad to fight, you know, physically. When the Palestinians today, they're killing themselves as martyrs, that's another form of jihad.
There's 4 ways to perform jihad. Through the tongue, through the throat, you know, through speaking it, through the heart, through thinking it, through the sword, which is physically, you know, in battle, or through the hand, which could be anywhere from giving alms or supporting or paying for war, or using your hand in a violent way.
The Quran says, you know, that if you could not fight physically, you have to fight with your finances. And this is one of the greatest jihad today, is the Muslims are standing by the mosques all over the world. They're declaring jihad, jihad, to jihad, to jihad. And what does that mean? It's we need to bring the great serpent down, which is America, and we need to bring Israel down. So now they're advancing jihad by putting monies by the hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars raised up specifically for jihad purpose. Jihad of deception is how you reach non-Muslim through a doctrine from the Quran, that where Muhammad commended one of his spies, you know, it's called Surah Al-Ahzab, which is the parties. And he said, go spy on our enemy. And the spy said to him, well, if I go over there, I have to lie about you and kill people like me. And Muhammad says, whatever you say, in the name of Allah, for my sake, or for Islam, or, you know, everything will be forgiven. This is where a new doctrine called At-Taqiyyah took place.
But it's all right to tell a lie, because the community is benefited by this person becoming a Muslim, and you are benefited because you have found the true faith of Islam. And so you can tell that prospective convert anything you want to tell them to bring them into Islam. Why? Because once they become a Muslim, they are far better off than they would be if they were not a Muslim.
Lying between Muslims is allowed when it's for the purpose of bringing them together.
many of the Muslim theologians come along and say, yes, there are 5 different places where lying is permitted.
It is very important to understand what these people are saying in Arabic and not what they're saying in English. For example, when you go on a website to look on the Quran, what the Quran says, if you understand what the Arabic says and you read that and then you come down to the English, what the English said, the English is not lining up with the Arabic completely. This is a deception of jihad to reach out Americans in this country.
Lying to Jews, especially in the case of war, and that includes also infidels in case of war. But there is constant war in the mind of Muslims against non-Muslims.
There is a surah, when I say surah, I'm saying chapter and verse, that says Allah loves those who outwit the best, especially in war and in love. So to your wife, or to the woman in your life, deception is a part of the whole culture.
It's all right to lie when you're taking a wife. And I have known some situations that have been devastating, where somebody will come over from one of these Arab countries and will start dating a Western girl and say, what we'd like to do is I'd like to marry you, and I own a large company back in Saudi Arabia, and I have a lot of money, and I have a large house, and the woman is just, blown off her feet and says, this is great. Then she gets married and goes back and finds out he doesn't have any money at all, and he has another wife back in Saudi Arabia. And she says, you lied to me. She says, no, 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 no. This is the will of God. And you are better off being a Muslim now.
There's a jihad of taxation, where Christians are forced to pay a much higher rate of taxation than Muslims are. The dhimmi status, where Jews and Christians, those who are not Muslims, in a Muslim country, are allowed to live there, but they must pay much higher taxes.
A dhimmi is a protected group, but a second-class citizen group. It should never rule itself. It should abide by Islamic law.
Ethnic minorities, religious minorities, in a Muslim state, they do not have the same rights. They are subjugated, they are forced to pay extra taxes, they do not have equality before the law, they are not allowed the same property rights, they are not allowed the same inheritance rights, and they are abused in many ways.
There is the jihad of taxation. The jihad when a Muslim invaded a country in the past. What they did is they put taxation, heavy taxation on the infidels.
I mean, consider this, for example. Imagine if in America your president decided that because of the increased cost of security throughout the states and all the damage done by Muslim terrorists, Muslims in America would have to pay 4 to 8 times more tax than the average citizen to compensate for that. Do you think that would be considered acceptable in America? And you could argue that there's a fair rationale for it, and it would seem reasonable because it's the Muslims who've caused this problem, so surely they should pay. No Christians in the Middle East have performed terrorism against the Muslims in the Middle East, and yet the Christians for the last 14 centuries have been forced in Egypt and throughout the Middle East to pay extra taxes, higher taxes, excruciating and oppressive, humiliating burden of taxes in a Muslim country.
Jihad through Sharia law is another entity, another way to intimidate the enemy, to pursue the enemy, to take over, to excel and exceed the Muslim over their enemies.
Muslims have rights, and Christians and non-Muslims do not have the same equal rights.
Taxation jihad is taking place all over the world today, for the people to pay taxation for the Muslim.
You've got also a financial inducement where they will actually use scholarships and the offer of cheaper taxation or no taxation if you convert to Islam.
In African world, if you can't pay taxation, you become slave.
You've got jihad of slavery, where you can enslave non-Muslims.
Africa is permitted to take on slaves. It's the only religion in the world that still allows slavery. In Saudi Arabia, they're still slaves. Boys, girls, women are bought from all over the world.
You can even use hostages and ransom as another means of jihad.
Jihad of slavery, it's all over. Today it's taking place even in America, in Europe, everywhere. When a woman when a Muslim marry an infidel, she become almost like his slave. You know, she could not abide, she could not go to church, she could not do a lot of things, she could not control the children. Many of the Muslims today allow their wife probably to practice her faith, but not the children. And now this is a form of slavery, you know, jihad of slavery.
Jihad of polygamy, that you can use polygamy as a disproportionate numeric advantage to soon outnumber your enemies by Muslims being allowed to have 4 wives, polygamy, divorce them quickly, have others have concubines.
There's 2 kinds of jihad in the ethnic cleansing. One jihad is literally to kill people and to destroy them, and the other jihad is to seed that nation. One of the commandments that Muhammad gave is to seed our women as much as we can.
Think about the math. If you think of taking over a country through marriage, you have 4 wives, you have 4.5 children per wife. How long does it take for Islam to spread?
Muhammad says in the Quran, word for word, your woman is your ground, is your floor that you walk on and seed every day. So therefore, what happened is, today the invasion in Europe, it's by the hundreds, thousands of European women being raped.
Islam does not have a concept of marriage. It just is a license for rape.
There's over 10,000 American Christian women marry Muslim men a year. And we can't even be sure if that's a true figure, because that's just what's happening in the court system.
Islamic scholars also identify the jihad of the spirits.
Jihad of the spirit is a completely different jihad than any other jihad. That's the spiritual realm jihad, which is in the Surah Al-Jinn, which is the jinnis, and the Surah also Al-Kahf, which is the cave. These 2 surahs are very powerful. This is where Allah said to Muhammad, He said, Inna arsalna laka, you know, we are sent to you a group of the jinns to listen to you. And now Muhammad recited the Quran to them, and after they recited the Quran, now they became Muslim demons. These demons became Muslim to teach the Islamic teaching throughout the spiritual realm and also to impact the physical realm. The jihad of the spirit is very, very strong, you know. When the Muslims stand in their mosques throughout the world on Friday, what they do is they unction curses and hexes and vexes all over the Muslim, all over, you know, from the Muslim world to the infidels, you know, to America, to Europe, to Israel, to all this, that those demons are unctioned to take those hexes and vexes and release them over the non-believers, you know, the infidels, the Jews and the Christians, or for that reason, anyone who is nothing, you know, that if you're not serving Islam, those are against you.
I started believing all the propaganda, all the different things that they were saying by going to different debates, and it was actually the Word of God they were using with me. It wasn't like they jerked Jesus out of my life. They told me they believed in Jesus, that they loved Him, and they had more scriptures or surahs in their books than we did as Christians. And they would bring those things out. They would bring things out about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and I didn't feel like I was giving anything up. I felt like I'd found truth. It was an extension to what I had believed, not a subtraction, more of an addition to my beliefs.
The Quran says that Jesus Christ was virgin born. The Quran says that Jesus lived a sinless life. The Quran says Muhammad was a sinner. The Quran says that Jesus performed many miracles. There's no record of Muhammad ever performing a miracle. The Quran says that Jesus will return to be the ruler and judge of the world. Very interesting. 7 times in the Quran, it says that Jesus is the very Word of God, the very Spirit of God.
Many Christian theologians will say, but the name for God in Arabic is Allah. And so in some of our translations of the Bible into Arabic, we say God is Allah. So there is some confusion as to whether or not the God is the same God. But my belief is that the God that is worshipped by the Muslims is an idolatrous God, is the moon god that was accepted by Muhammad back in the time when he was in Mecca.
God of Islam and God of Christianity and Judaism are not the same God. You know, Allah, you know, does not believe in a deity of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Almost every Muslim I talk to believes that the Trinity is God the Father, God the wife, Mary, and God the Son, Jesus. And they believe that we teach that God the Father had sexual engagement with God the wife, Mary, and that God the Son was brought about, and they can only see that in the terms of three people.
It's not the same God as the Christians and the Jews. And we have gotten so politically correct, we're no longer scripturally sound.
When you begin looking at the theologies, comparing the theologies of Islam and Christianity, one of the key questions that comes up is the position of Jesus. Jesus within Christianity and Jesus within Islam. Now, for the Muslims, they are very disdainful of our position of a Trinity, because they simply cannot see the Trinity in the way that we believe that it exists, as God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, three persons, and yet being one. And they see in reality that we have three different gods.
In Islam, they say that God is so transcendent, he is so far removed that a Muslim can never know God in a personal relationship. For the Muslim, you see, he only knows the laws of God, the commands of God that have been given through the prophets, but he cannot know God himself.
After I started comparing Jesus to Muhammad, I couldn't buy what Islam was selling me anymore. It started becoming unsettled in my spirit. And I started really praying, and I asked God, I said, God, show me if you're real. Show me who you are. Forget Islam, forget Christianity, forget it all. I want to know the truth. And that was the prayer I started praying. Give me truth.
I do not believe secular humanism can beat Islam. Only biblical Christianity with the power of God, through the Word of God, with the power of the Holy Spirit, will defeat Islam. This is also spiritual war. Military enemies can be fought with military means, but when you're fighting a spiritual enemy, and when you're fighting religious deception, the weapons you need in your warfare need to be the sword of the Spirit, the Word of God, the truth, the Bible.
We are living in exciting days for the Christian, because we don't have to live in fear. See, we know that God is in control, that God has a plan and purpose for all these events. When the president of Iran says that his goal is to bring in the final Messiah, the Mahdi as he calls him, for the Shiite Muslim, he believes that there is going to come a day when a Shiite Messiah called the Mahdi is going to return. They believe he's now living outside of Tehran down in a well, and that when things get so bad, and according to the president of Iran, he claims that one of his goals is he must create the turmoil in the world by attacking Israel, wiping Israel off the face of the earth. This is the only way, he says, that the Muslim Mahdi can return. He will be the Messiah who will convert the world to Islam. And it's very interesting, according to the president of Iran, that Jesus, they say, will return with the Mahdi, and that Jesus Christ will aid in the conversion of the world to Islam.
I believe the Lord brought the Muslims to the United States of America so we could give them the gospel. You can't go freely into Saudi Arabia or wherever and preach the gospel. But we can do it here now, and we better do it here and now, while we still can do it here and now, or we're going to lose our opportunity to be able to share Jesus.
Also available from Carroll Productions, The New Barbarians, training children to kill. Shocking, informative, eye-opening. It offers deeper insight into Islam's plan for world domination. To purchase this and other informative resources, visit carrolltv.com.
Terror of Islam is embedded within the teaching of Islam.
The spirit of hatred and killing and slaughter is the spirit of Islam as it is written in the Quran.
Now I have, in one hand I have the Quran, in the other hand I have the AK-47 machine gun. I can change the world.
Islam has a plan to take over the world. They believe very strongly that they are going to create a worldwide ummah, or nation of Islam.
Plainly, the Muslims have a missionary agenda, and governments, Muslim governments like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, are funding the evangelization of the West through videos, through booklets, through leaflets, and through many other programs.
We're seeing Islamic societies seeking to impose a 7th century Arab worldview on everybody else.
While they all know life is better in the West, they want to destroy the West.
Muslim apologists are desperately trying to separate the terrorism or Muslims who do terrorism from Islam. But they can't do that because all of our education was geared towards violence towards non-Muslims, geared towards violence towards Jews, especially Jews. So to try to separate now terrorism from Islam is disingenuous.
No serious scholar in the world will attempt to say the hadith or the statements of Muhammad were peaceful.
Islam is not religion of peace to the infidels. Who are the infidels? Islam came exactly to correct the Christians and the Jews to say that you are false, that you are perverted, and you are not even real.
Many people say that Islam is a peaceful religion. I have worked with Muslims in the Middle East. I've worked with them in Europe. I've worked with them in Indonesia. I've worked with them in many parts of the world. And I believe that Islam is anything but a peaceful religion.
The perfect example of Islam demonstrated by Muhammad himself. He was not a man of peace. He was not a man of tolerance. He was a man who taught death and destruction.
Islam is definitely not religion of peace. The surah teaches that, and it specifically, you know, it hides under a doctrine called at-taqiyya. At-taqiyya permit the Muslim to lie under that to the Western world.
They have a totally different value system than we have, and whenever we have an encounter, a cultural encounter with them, we from the West have difficulty trying to deal with this because we say lying is lying and this is a sin. Not for them at all.
There are only a handful of verses that you heard Muslim imams, especially right after 9/11, they would constantly repeat on cable television, where it appeared that Muslims were a peaceful, loving people being tolerant of other religions.
They say that jihad means an inner struggle. I grew up in the Middle East and I lived in the Middle East for 30 years. I've never heard the word inner struggle to explain jihad. Never. Jihad is always a holy war for the sake of Allah to conquer the world Islam by any means, including lying.
The Islamists in the West are using the argument and saying jihad means struggle or struggle with it. Why? Because there is one statement in Al-Bukhari, you can find a hadith or the statements of the Prophet Muhammad that says, now I resort to the jihad that is within, the self-struggle. But if you look at all the collection of the hadith before that, they were all jihad by the sword. That means I don't have any more land to conquer, now I can resort to the struggle that is within, the struggle of the soul.
Some interpret the word jihad to be an inner struggle with oneself, but that's not what I saw living among the Muslims for 15 years.
If jihad means struggle within, then how was struggle within established in Spain? When Tariq ibn Ziyad made his famous speech, the sea is behind you and the enemy is ahead of you, being Spain, taking over Spain. When they sacked Venice, when they went to North Africa, when Islam spread throughout the Middle East, when they killed 70 million in India, the huge, biggest massacre that ever happened in the history of mankind was not the 6 million Jews. It was 70 million Hindus in India. The writings of Babur Nama and what have you. Those are all historic facts. Yet no one is bringing these historic facts to the table to examine the history of Islam. Because we are not supposed to be looking at the history of Islam. We are supposed to only accept the claim of the Islamists as fact.
The life of Muhammad and reading the jihad and all the battles, I mean, there were numerous battles that this religion was birthed not through peace, through war.
Islam is perceived as peaceful by so many people when Islam spread at the point of the sword through jihad. In the space of just the first century of Islam, they spread from Saudi Arabia across the whole of North Africa, wiped out the Christian communities of all of North Africa. The lands of Origen, Tertullian, Augustine, Clement, I mean the greatest names in early church history, their lands were once Christian lands. The whole of North Africa used to be Christian, and yet it was once Islam by the point of the sword.
There are 32 major areas of conflict in the world today. Now those 32 major conflicts, 24 of them include Muslims. Fighting against somebody, against the Russians in Chechnya, against the small Christian community in Indonesia, against the Christians and animists in Sudan, against the Jewish people in Palestine. Anywhere in the world where you find a conflict, invariably you're going to find Muslims battling against somebody. And the reason behind that is again, Islam is not a peaceful religion. Islam is a religion that uses force. All you have to do is read the history. It has always used force.
Terror of Islam is embedded within the teaching of Islam. It really started with even a Quranic verse where it's ordered them to strike terror in the hearts of the enemy of Allah and their enemy.
The teachings in the Quran and the Hadith. I mean, even in surah, which is surah is a chapter and verse in the Quran, it says, smite at the unbeliever at their neck until you make a great slaughter of them. Now, what is that supposed to mean? It also goes on to say, take not Jews and Christians as your friend.
Considering how many Muslim flags and nations and missionary societies have crossed swords and a sword as a symbol of Islam. In fact, you just look at the Saudi Arabian's airline, and you can see the sword on the back, on the tail fin there. It's the emblem of Islam, the sword. And you know that it's not, they're not talking about the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God, as we mean when we're thinking of a spiritual sword. We think of quoting Scripture. They mean literal sword. Muhammad wielded a literal sword. He cut literal heads off. And that's how Islam advanced in the early days.
There's one system that we're fighting. We need to label it Islamofascist, Islamic fundamentalism. And everybody who adheres to these principles that they follow is an enemy and must be addressed and treated as such.
If a Christian goes out and does a bombing, or a suicide bombing, or murders people, or hijacks a plane, kills innocent people, that Christian is an apostate. He is in violation of the teachings of the Bible, the commands of Christ, and the clear doctrines of the church. However, if a Muslim goes out and performs bombings or assassinations or kills innocent people in the name of Islam, he's been consistent with the teachings of Islam, the example of Muhammad, and the teachings of Muslim mosques throughout the centuries.
The moment that Western mindsets begin to say critiquing a religion should end. So when the terrorist try to blow up some cars in England, and the Prime Minister in England says, we're not going to use the word Islamic fundamentalist or Islamic fascist, or we're not going to even use the word Islam. We're just going to say war and terror. That means you're not allowed to criticize Islam. You can criticize the Catholic Church. You can criticize Christianity. You cannot critique or criticize Islamic religion. Why can the West criticize everything and every single dogma in the world except Islam? Once we do that, once we do not criticize Islamic fundamentalism or the Islamic writ or the Islamic Sharia or legislation, that's when we have begun to lose our freedoms. That's what they want, and it's over.
I do not think America is going to win the war against terrorism until it takes a close look at the religion that has inspired it.
In Islam, there is no radical Islam. There is Islam. Or there is liberal Muslims. There is no radical.
So while most Muslim people are peaceful, most Muslim people are not terrorists, I trust that most Muslim people are not even terror sympathizers, although we're not sure of that. Many millions of Muslims did rejoice at the news of the World Trade Center coming. Believe in Allah and in His apostle, Muhammad. And they said, what is the second greatest command? He said, to participate in jihad.
The spirit of Islam, or Islam, is not compatible with democracy. It is not compatible with freedoms. And it's not that it is anti-American or anti-Jewish. Under the banner of Islam, the Muslims massacred Christians in Lebanon, killed Copts in Egypt, who were Arabs, by the way, killed Assyrians in Syria, who were Arabs, massacred thousands in Lebanon, who were Arabs, killed Hindus in India, who were Hindus. They were not Westerners. They were not Americans and Jews.
So jihad is a well-developed concept within Islam. It has, from the time of Muhammad, been used extensively.
The spirit of Islam wants to kill anybody that is not Muslim, wants to kill every minority. They killed people in the Middle East. Armenians in Turkey, over 2 million Armenians were massacred. All that in the name of Islam.
In the first century of Islam, they took the whole of North Africa, destroyed 3,200 churches, and annihilated a vast amount of church. In the first 3 centuries of Islam, 50% of all the Christians worldwide had been annihilated or forcibly converted to Islam, or their children had been taken and brought up as Muslims. So Islam has advanced by the point of the sword.
Lebanon used to be the only majority Christian country in the Middle East. We are a republic, very much like the United States. It was the only Arabic democracy in the Middle East. We were open-minded, we were fair, we were multicultural, we were tolerant. We prided ourselves in our multiculturalism. We had open border policy, we welcomed everyone into our country.
Back in the 7th and 8th centuries, Islam invaded Europe, and they took Spain and they took Portugal, and they even were threatening France, and they were threatening Austria, and they took the whole of the Balkans, what became Yugoslavia, and they were pushing into the heartland of Europe. By vigorous military activities, the West managed to push Islam out and preserve Western Europe as Christendom and safe from Islam. And if they hadn't, where would the gospel have come from that came to America or to South Africa or any other part of the world? Our history would be very different.
Egypt was a Christian country. It has Jews and Christians living in it in the 7th century. And because of a weak point in this superpower's history, in the 7th century, it was overwhelmed by Arabs from Arabia, who came in, took it over, and in a few decades, they've changed the language of the superpower Egypt into Arabic, and changed the religion of Egypt into Islam through the sword.
We did not realize that once the Muslims became the majority in the society, they started asking for more Islamic rights in the government. Instead of them adopting our Western way of life in the Middle East, they wanted to change our ways, even though we were conservative Christians.
The Muslim armies wiped out first the structure, the social structure of Christianity and Judaism within what we call now Saudi Arabia, and then all over what we call now the Arab world. Their armies went out east and west.
They attacked all the way through Greece and the Byzantine Empire up into what was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, Vienna, in the heart of Europe, was besieged by the Muslims 3 times, and only by tremendous military vigor managed to throw the Muslims back.
You are not speaking Arabic now, and you are not a Muslim, because the Islamic armies had stopped in what we call now France. At that time it was called Gaul.
Of all the wars going on in the world today, about 60 wars going on worldwide, the vast majority of those wars and terrorist campaigns have Islam as the common denominator. Most of the terrorists in the world are Muslim. Almost all of the suicide bombers worldwide have been Muslim. The worst terrorist attacks have happened from Muslims. The worst human rights abuses and dictatorships and oppression of people and persecution of Christians have happened in Muslim countries.
Jihad today is, with intimidation, is taking place throughout Africa, throughout Egypt, throughout in the Palestinian area by Israel, throughout Syria, throughout the whole Muslim world. And the statistic shows what's happening. Many Christians are leaving their areas immediately, afraid what's going to take place next.
From threatening China, the western frontiers of China, through to Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim nation in the world, with tremendous amounts of violence against Christians often perpetrated there, with the terrorism of the Muslim terrorists in the Philippines against the Christians there, all the way through, you see Islam advancing and involved in some of the most violent acts against democratic countries.
The jihad to conquer Europe is the front line, because Europe is the first stepping stone. If they can destroy Europe first, they can concentrate on America next.
Today they are seeking to take the West by immigration, by guest workers, and by marriage. Islam is taking over France, and already there are more Muslims in France than Christians. In Britain, Islam is the fastest growing religion. You have mosques being built to the tunes of millions of dollars, Regent Park's mosque and others. So plainly the Muslims have a goal, and it is possible that there are more Muslims in Britain right now than there are practicing Christians, as in those who are in church every Sunday. That is a strong possibility. In Germany, you have millions of Muslims, Turks and other Gastarbeiters, the guest workers coming in. But now the Muslims are exulting. They're saying, we are winning in Europe today by being immigrants and guest workers, what we never won before with our armies.
In Europe, they were burning automobiles, they were burning buildings, and they're doing all of this over there. And the Muslims were marching in formation, and as they were marching, they were chanting that phrase, "This is our land. This is our land. This is our land." And when the reporter asked them, "What do you mean this is your land? Is it because you are citizens of this land?" They said, "No. Our ancestor never finished the conquest."
So Islam has tried to take the West before by blatant jihad.
A man who used to be the head of the CIA in the United States, Woolsey, gave a speech not too long ago, and in this speech he said that we are now in the 4th World War. He said the First World War was in Europe, the Second World War was in Europe, the Third World War was the Cold War, the West against Russia. He says the 4th World War is being fought today, and he says it is primarily the Western world against 3 enemies. And he defines the 3 enemies, and he said the first enemy are the fascist governments of Iraq and Syria, and of course they're both Islamic countries. The second enemy, he said, are the Shiites of Iran. And the Shiites have a great desire to defeat the United States. They call him the Great Satan all the time, all the demonstrations. He said the third enemy is the Wahhabi Sunnis. The Sunnis are located primarily in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, in many other parts of the Middle East, probably having somewhere around 80% of all Muslims are Sunnis. The Shiites, or the Shias, their main area, Iran, parts of Lebanon, and they also have pockets in Iraq. And part of the war that we have now in Iraq deals with the fact that there are both the Shias down in the southern part of Iraq and the Sunnis that are in the northern part. And the two groups don't get along. The world war is going to continue on until one of these two groups might be a victor.
Even though they have a Sunni-Shia divide, they are uniting when it comes to a battle against Israel. And they cooperate with each other on every level, financially, politically, militarily, weapons cache, weapons aids. It's all one system.
Islamic history records that Muhammad rounded up 2,000 Jewish leaders there in Medina, had them beheaded their bodies thrown into a trench and burned. So that what we see happening in the Middle East with the hatred of the Jews, as well as the Christians, is nothing new to the modern mind of a Muslim. They believe that this is simply living out what is the perfect example of Islam demonstrated by Muhammad himself.
In 1948, the Jews were given a state, and the Arabs were given a state. But the Arabs refused to have a state. And the deep feeling in the Arab world was no country in the area should be ruled by anybody who's not a Muslim. And when the State of Israel was created for Jews to rule over themselves, that was something that Muslims could not tolerate. And that's why the State of Israel will never be accepted among Muslims.
It's the only place in the world where three continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, all connect. It was the center of the trade routes. It's where all the trade routes in the Fertile Crescent between the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia and Greece, they all came through that little nation of Israel. And so even today, the superpowers are interested in that little strip of land 40 miles wide.
As a political system, Islam was used heavily in the Middle East in the late 70s by the Muslim Brotherhood. And it was very much in all the schools in the Middle East, in the mosques, everywhere.
We were told that Jerusalem was a Muslim city, stolen from us by the Jews and the Christians.
Muslims like to tell you that Muhammad flew one night to Jerusalem and that
the State of Israel will never be accepted among Muslims.
It's the only place in the world where three continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, all connect. It was the center of the trade routes. It's where all the trade routes in the Fertile Crescent between the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia and Greece, they all came through that little nation of Israel. And so even today, the superpowers are interested in that little strip of land 40 miles wide.
As a political system, Islam was used heavily in the Middle East in the late 70s by the Muslim Brotherhood. And it was very much in all the schools in the Middle East, in the mosques, everywhere.
We were told that Jerusalem was a Muslim city, stolen from us by the Jews and the Christians.
Muslims like to tell you that Muhammad flew one night to Jerusalem and that's where he, ascended into heaven. There, it is not mentioned as Jerusalem. It simply mentions a place in the north. Jerusalem is mentioned 800 times in the Bible as the capital of the Jewish people. In the Quran, there is no mention anywhere in the Quran of Jerusalem. This is a modern-day fiction that it is an Arab capital. And so again, they are using something that does not exist in the Quran purely for modern political purposes that has no history in Islamic writings.
There's a law in Islam called taqiyya or kitman, and that's when a Muslim is allowed to lie in order to advance the cause of Islam. And this is why when talking heads on television, when Muslim leaders right now lying about we don't really hate the Jews, we just want our land back. What they're not telling you is the other half of the lie is that in the Quran is not nice to the Jews. The verses of the Quran are very clear in how the Muslims should declare war on the Jews and kill them until all the land is liberated from the Jews.
You hear the president of Iran say that the ultimate goal of Iran is that Israel must be wiped off the face of the earth, that all the Jews must be exterminated.
We are being infiltrated by an ideology that's extremely hateful, extremely anti-Semitic, extremely disrespectful to the rights of minorities, of women, and of Jews, especially Jews, and also anti-Christian.
When we got together as Muslims, we expressed the facts openly. The Arabs sold us out. The Arabs use us as refugees so they can make an argument for themselves that how bad Israel is. It is not a problem for us to share the truth with each other. The problem becomes is to share the truth with Westerners or with Jews or with non-Muslims, because in the Middle East and under the Islamic system that we think, loyalty must come before truth.
In America, we are now being taught that if you're pro-Palestinian, then you must hate Jews. Then you must hate Israel.
The Bible says that in the last days, the nations of the earth will come against that little nation of Israel. God had promised that nation that that land belonged to the people of Israel. This is one of the signs that the Bible says when we see this happening, know that Christ's return is near.
Our children are fed the hatred towards the Jews from their mother's milk. So from the time they are infants, all they hear, all they're raised with is hatred and hatred and hatred. That starts in the home before they even go to school. That is enforced every time they watch television, every Friday, when they watch the sermons of the sheikhs and the mullahs and the imams.
The hatred that Muslims have for Jews. And it is a tragedy what is happening today in the Palestinian state. It is happening in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, and so many of the Muslim countries where even in their cartoons, children are being told to hate and to kill the Jews. Their textbooks, and this has been well documented, that even the textbooks in Saudi Arabia promote that Islam will not dominate the world until all Jews are killed and Israel is destroyed.
The hadith from Bukhari wa Muslim says the day of Islam will not come about until the Muslim fight. Who will they fight? The infidels. Even the rocks and the tree will cry out, Abdullah, servant of Allah, Muslim behind me. There's an infidel. Come and behead him.
The only time there will be peace in the Middle East is when all the Arabs kill the Jews and throw them into the sea. No matter how much Israel gives, the Arabs will find the reason to wipe every last Jew from the Middle East.
The religious system itself created a generation that says you were chosen to be superior over all other nations. When the Quranic verse is being recited in class, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. You were the most favored of all nations. It doesn't simply become as a chosen people per se to send the message of Islam, but it is chosen to say that we have been chosen to become a superior nation, superior ummah or Islamic nation amongst all the tribes of the earth.
They are taught that Islam is superior to all other religions, that Muslims are superior to Christians and to Jews and to anybody else. So instead of them being taught equality, they are taught prejudice.
This is a culture of pride and shame. The Arab culture is a very proud culture.
The kind of Muslim I was a zealot. Our family believed. We loved Allah with all our heart. We lived for Islam. We lived to take Muhammad's message and Allah's message abroad.
The Islamic education that we get in the Middle East generates pride. This pride manifests in anger. This pride begins to teach children that all our mishaps in life, our sufferings, whether it's poverty, whether it's lack of joblessness, whatever, is caused by a Zionist conspiracy. So an enemy is chosen, and the enemy is slapped with everything under the sun.
In Islam, a Muslim who is raised that God has given you the right to kill the infidels because they are subhumans. It is your right to kill them and feel no remorse killing them. Actually killing them allows you to enter heaven.
The only sure guarantee to enter paradise is if you die in a holy jihad, fighting in the cause of Islam. And so for a Muslim, they believe that if they die in a holy jihad, which many people call the sixth pillar of faith, they believe that not only do they avoid the balancing scale, but they have immediate entrance into paradise, where there are 72 black-eyed virgins waiting for them to serve their sexual desires.
Islam is promising a lot of things that these young men, that they died in martyrdom, they don't have. Now their family is saying, good, you're going to buy us a place in heaven. Go and do what you have to do.
The Quran teaches that at the first drop of blood, a martyr's blood, The angels come down from heaven and they carry a crown of pearl that is placed at the head on the head of the martyr. And then he is carried by the arms of the angels to be seated at the right arm of God, where he is given all the glory of heaven, the virgins, the alcohol, and just the blissful life forever and ever and ever.
Islam promises that when you die, the first drop of blood that you give, you can take with you to heaven 70 of your closest family members.
The sad part about the way the upbringing of children is they indoctrinate us not into a culture of life, giving to your community. It's a culture of death, where your pride comes from dying in the jihad against infidels.
The rewards of being faithful to Allah by killing infidels, by becoming a suicide martyr. This is the way you can go to heaven, and you can receive all the glory and all the sex and all the drinking and everything that you could not have on earth. It will be given to you in heaven.
Some mothers actually stand in front of cameras after their children have died in wars, died in the jihad, died in the terror against Israel, or even in terrorism, and stand up and say, I'm celebrating my son's death.
Saddam Hussein was paying $25,000 per suicide bomber's family, to the family, per suicide bomber, who was willing to go out and kill himself, so his family will be honored.
The Muslim people they're ready to die for their belief. They're ready to give their life as a living sacrifice for the cause.
Here is a Muslim that has no guarantee of going to heaven. There is nothing in the Quran that says they're going to go to heaven unless they are killed in a jihad. What does that do for martyrdom? And if you think you can be killed in a jihad and your father and your mother and other brothers can come with you, then this is a very strong motivating force for jihad.
The Muslim create truth
where he, ascended into heaven. There,
terrorism in America and in Europe, in all those places, to impact government and culture, to change the way of that country from end to end.
You have the perfect motive for a person to strap on a suicide vest and go and blow innocent people up.
We terrorize the world to liberate our world. These are not new things. These are taught to us from our childhood. It's embedded in our DNA. It's in our fiber.
Well, you see, they believe that not only the person gets entrance to paradise, but the immediate family will then get immediate entrance into paradise when they die.
Terrorist is not in our dictionary. It's the liberators in our, that's what it's called, PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. And our job was to liberate the world.
They are teaching their children that the only way to have a moral society, what is moral, what is good, is Islam. And this is what Islam teaches us. You need to kill the infidel. You need to hate the infidel. Muslims and Jews are apes and pigs because they are cursed by Allah. Therefore, you are justified in your hatred.
Every subject that we had in school had something to mention about hatred of Jews. We couldn't escape it. It was in school, in every subject. It was in the mosque sermons. It was in songs.
Madrasa it means school. It's a Muslim school specifically. We learned our purpose, what to do and how to do, and this has prepared us for next stage. The next step is what to do in Islam. Now we come to love Allah and we're ready to give our life.
I listened to poetry daily in school, telling us that jihad is the most honorable thing. Jihad to kill Jews is the most honorable thing.
It was my mother teaching, says, my son, if you kill Jew, your hand will light up before the throne of Allah, and his heavenly host will celebrate that you killed Jew.
Therefore, you are justified in your hatred. And this is how you build a suicide bomber. You cannot build a suicide bomber all of a sudden in 1 year. You start when they are children and you raise them with this mentality. So when they become adults, they are ready to receive the rewards of heaven that you have told them about since the time they were babies.
Right from kindergarten, I remember going to school, and we all had to line up and sing, Arabs are beloved and Jews are dogs. Didn't know what a word Jew meant. Ask your father, who's the Jews? The sons of the monkeys and the pigs. From every single aspect of life, you ask questions from the teacher, from the parents, from the family. Same opinion is given, supporting each other. That the Jews are the most degraded people on earth. The Jews were prophet killers. The Jews spread mad cow disease. The Jews put infertility drugs for the Palestinians so they don't have children. The Jews run the American Congress. The Jews run the media. There is a Zionist Jewish conspiracy to take over the whole globe.
As Muslim kids, everything around us wanted to give us hatred to Jews, fear of Jews, that they are monsters, they are evil. They wanted to hurt us children. They wanted to destroy the world. They wanted to take over our homes, kill our parents, kill us children. Jews wanted to kill pregnant Arab women, drink the blood of Arab children. I was told, don't take any candy or fruit from a stranger. It could be a Jew trying to poison you.
The very first verse I've learned, and they were sure that I should learn it. I'll say it in Arabic, then I'll translate it into English. It says, أنتم كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس وأهل الكتاب هم الفاسقون. That means you are the best nation evolved to mankind, and the people of the book are the perverted integrationists.
When we listened to the radio, all the songs were about jihad, about killing the infidels, about the honor of Arabs can only come from jihad and martyrdom.
This is what Islam teaches us. You need to kill the infidel. You need to hate the infidel.
When you are taught at 7 years old to kill for the sake of Islam, it is very poetic call for a child, because now you know you are a liberator.
I was trained when I was 13, my first kill when I was 14. And you can measure onto that how this would affect a guy like me in that age.
And I was trained to kill from that age, and then as I grew older, we went on every call where Islam called us to.
By age 7, 8, a child is already saying, I hate Jews, I want to kill Jews, I'm proud to kill Jews.
Most noble thing is to kill and to be killed.
When I was 7 years old, we joined, the Muslim Brotherhood joined the PLO. The PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization.
When I was 13 years old, I joined the militant fragments. And I was okay with the family, because a warrior who dies on the battlefield is to reach heaven and his family is to be respected.
By the time I came to America, 18 years old, I was part of the PLO and joined the Muslim Brotherhood, the radical Islamist movement, which became the Islamic Association of Palestine here.
I was trained to kill Jews because they were declared since Muhammad times that they are the enemy of God and the enemy of the Prophet Muhammad.
So when you raise the children from birth, in their home, they are taught hatred and killing. They watch it on television, hatred and killing.
I was killing for two reasons. First, to pave the road for God, for Allah, kingdom, Allah's domination of Islam. That's how I was trained, and that's how I was prepared. And second, because after all, they created in me, by that time, that early age, a fighting, killing machine, which just never stops. It keeps going on.
We, in a Western society that is raised to respect others, to love others, and especially those in a Judeo-Christian society, we are raised in the Bible from the time we are children, from the time we go to Sunday school, that we should love others, that we should respect others, that you cannot kill others. You cannot even commit suicide. It is considered sin to even commit suicide. In Catholicism, if you commit suicide, you are not even entitled to a church service. You're not allowed even to be buried in a Christian cemetery. So we look at killing others or taking away a soul as a crime, as a sin. However, in Islam, killing others is not only permitted in Islam, but it is encouraged. The only way a Muslim is guaranteed an entrance into heaven is by becoming a martyr, and that is by killing others for the sake of Allah.
Christian terrorists don't blow themselves up in the Palestinian areas, and there's plenty of them. The PFLP, Popular Front to Liberate Palestine, is a Christian terrorist organization. They don't blow themselves up. Only the Muslims blow themselves up. Westerners need to ask themselves why. If both of them suffer under occupation, why are they both not equally blowing themselves up? Because this has to do with the message of salvation. It is a message of salvation. To assure yourself to go to paradise, you must die in jihad. So you expedite your death, whether it's by you lunging against the weapons, against the enemy, or whether it's by you wrapping yourself with explosives. You try to expedite your death so you can enter into the different adab of heaven and intercede for 70 members of your family.
Terror of Islam is embedded within the teaching of Islam.
The spirit of hatred and killing and slaughter is the spirit of Islam as it is written in the Quran.
Now I have, in one hand, I have the Quran, in the other hand, I have the AK-47 machine gun. I can change the world.
Islam has a plan to take over the world. They believe very strongly that they are going to create a worldwide ummah, or nation of Islam.
Plainly, the Muslims have a missionary agenda, and governments, Muslim governments like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, are funding the evangelization of the West through videos, through booklets, through leaflets, and through many other programs.
We're seeing Islamic societies seeking to impose a 7th century Arab worldview on everybody else.
While they all know life is better in the West, they want to destroy the West.
Dawah is different from jihad. Jihad is for just to speak about what's almost commended, you know, for the Muslim to do in a way.
The whole educational system, the whole culture, is geared to doing violence towards non-Muslims, to convert them, to do jihad.
Dawah, on the other hand, is the evangelism of the Muslim, how they go from one country to another and they start pursuing Islam through building mosques, building Muslim, centers, just like it's happening all over the United States of America, buying homes and turning them to mosques.
I can speak from experience from this mosque in Atlanta that I was involved with, from basically the early conception of the mosque through many years. It started out very small. It started out in a home, like a cell group. It wasn't this big building all of a sudden. It was a very small house.
Then they put a menorah, and they put, which is the towers, the tower that goes on the mosque, and they put a crescent facing the facing Mecca, and now this has become a house of declaration where da'wah to the entire neighborhood, to come to the neighborhood and start turning people to Islam.
And then they tore that house down and they built a bigger building, and then from there they kept purchasing the homes around the area.
Anytime a big mosque put in an area, that's mean it's a dominion, it is power, it's victory, that where you guys failed, we have succeeded you.
Islam sees the mosque as being a symbol of their dominance in a particular area.
Every 5.5 days, a new mosque is open in the United States of America.
They have a two-pronged attack as far as the mosques are concerned. One is the building and the keeping up of mosques, the building of beautiful, very expensive mosques. And the second one is the destruction of churches. And these two go hand in hand.
The Muslims are trying to buy churches. That is the most, number one increase in building mosques. They take those churches, they bring the cross down, and they put the crescent facing Mecca.
Is they're saying the mosque must be bigger than the Christian church and more beautiful. For instance, they wanted to build a mosque in Rome. And the mosque, the original plans is that the mosque would be not only taller than St. Peter's, but it would be larger than St. Peter's.
In America, there's over 3,000 mosques that's open all over the land, and Muslim centers and whatsoever. These are open for the purpose of reaching American people through the al-taqiyya, which is the lion doctrine, to reach non-believer infidels to turn them to Islam.
When we were in Atlanta, the mosque that I was attending was in a very poverty area, was in a very poor area with a lot of drugs. So the Muslims from that community were trying to better that area. So we were doing things to reach out to the community, to the children on the streets. They had actually put in a playground with basketball courts, and were encouraging the local children so they could come there as a safe place and play. So we were reaching out to that community to also expand that mosque. That mosque actually bought the property next door, which was a church.
The mosque is the one that everything is impregnated right there. It's the law of Sharia, how to kill, how to become, how to intimidate, how to learn who you are. It's the identity, taking place. And when you have those in the United States of America, these are teaching these people what's yet to come.
The involvement with the mosque was an everyday life thing.
The teaching of Islam, the teaching of jihad, the teaching of da'wah, the teaching of New World Order, Ummah.
The mosque, that's where all your relationships were developed, all your friendships were developed. That was the family, the ties, the community was all there at the mosque.
This is the purpose of those mosques and Muslim centers, to influence the culture from end to end, financially, physically, spiritually, and every other way.
I spoke one time with a imam, and we were talking about strategy, and he said, if we as Muslims are going to win the Western world, we must first win Western Europe. If we're to win Western Europe, we must first win England. And if we are to win England, we must first win London. And in 1960, there was one mosque in London. Today, there are 632 mosques in London.
In the early 70s, this is when I went over to Europe, went to England, Germany, France, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria. We went to Switzerland, all those places, and we advanced the name of Islam through the Muslim people first, and we were encouraging these men to become zealot and strong in their faith.
Throughout the whole world, we see a resurgent Islam, well-funded by petrodollars and vigorous in their missionary activities.
The natural resources that Islam has for the propagation of its faith are far superior to those that we have in the Christian church.
Islam has a lot of petrodollars because of the Western investment in the oil industry, because the West discovered oil under their tents and their camels, and the West extracted the oil and refined it and used it and paid them for it, and so these Arab nations have got a tremendous amount of wealth that have all come from the Western industrial nations who have been paying them for their petrol.
They say that Saudi Arabia pumps 8 million barrels of oil a day. That I know for a fact. They say they clear $20 a day, and I know that for a fact, per barrel of oil. That gives them $160 million a day. Now, they give 1/4 of their money, petrol dollars, to the furtherance of Islam in various ways, through charities and also just straight out for dawah and for other things. And so that means that they have about $40 million every day for the furtherance of Islam.
1/3 of all the barrels of oil which are sold to the West, 1/3 of the money goes to weapons for the Middle East. A large amount of the others are going into missionary efforts to buy up Western institutions, to encroach on Western media, to encroach on film producers, to even buy up newspapers, and to get influence in the West.
Any American who drives his car on a normal usage and heats his house probably contributes more money by buying oil to Islam than he ever contributes to Christian missions.
Oil money from the Arabic world, which is Islamic, and especially from Saudi Arabia, which is extremely abiding by the ideology of Islam. And by the way, people say Wahhabism and Salafism. Islam is Islam. What we think is radical Muslim is basically practicing Muslim. People in Saudi Arabia are not doing anything extreme. They are just following the words of the Quran, the way Muhammad wanted his followers to follow the words of the Quran.
80% of the mosques in the United States are Wahhabi mosques, which means that they are radical mosques. Now, how did they get to that point? Well, they got to that point because the finances are flowing from the petrol dollars into the World Muslim League, into Saudi Arabia, and over the United States. And if a mosque will become Wahhabi, then the next thing you know, they get aid and help from the Wahhabis, but they have to declare themselves a Wahhabi mosque.
The Wahhabis are the most rigid, very rigid system of Islamic madras or school.
Those Islamic zealots who are who want to enforce the words of the Quran are using their money to do God's work.
In the Muslim world, throughout the world, in mosque, every Friday, when the Imam finished speaking and preaching, after they did their curses against the infidels, which is the Christians and the Jews, America and Israel, they collect the finances based on surah. The surah says if you cannot fight, you must fight with your finances.
There are many mosques in the United States who are telling their people that Sharia law is above the U.S. Constitution.
Mosques in your community, those mosques are nothing more but breeding territories and organizing factors and places of meeting for terrorist organizations to plot our destruction on American soil, in America, using our laws and our freedoms against us.
Finances are raised by the millions from all those mosques, you know, for jihad. What is jihad? When they call jihad, jihad is for the destruction of America and Israel, the great Satan and the small Satan.
There is still a lot of anti-Semitism in Western mosques, in American mosques, in European mosques. There is a lot of hatred still.
What they are preaching is the words of the Quran as written by the Prophet Muhammad, as said in the Quran, which the Muslims consider al-insan al-kamil, the perfect man. So when you hear words about kill the infidels and kill the Jews and take the enemy and cut off their heads and smite them on their fingers and toes because they disobeyed Allah, those are words taken strictly out of the Quran and preached in mosques on Friday.
In all the major cities of America, in the mosques, they're bringing these sermons and these clergy, and you see them on the stage praising Allahu Akbar with their faces covered with knives in their hands, and you see the recitation of the Quran. The guy is standing up there and saying, فَإِذَا لَقَيْتُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَضَرْبُ الرِّقَابِ. If you meet the unbelievers, then smite off their heads. And the entire community saying, Allahu Akbar, Allah is great, Allahu Akbar, Allah is great.
In our churches, We do not preach killing and beheading and smiting off of necks and cutting off of fingers and toes. We preach love. We preach forgiveness. So our children, from the time they are babies, they are taught to forgive. Do not judge others lest you be judged.
I know that Americans don't like the idea of closing down a place of worship if it claims to be such. But if it is found that that religious worship center is only a front for subversive terrorist political activities, then surely one just has to face facts and say, listen, if this mosque is being used for terrorist activities, it no longer is a religious center, it is now a terrorist cell, and it must be stamped out.
The invasion must take place not in jihad only, but also in truth. What is the truth? The truth is a da'wah that comes through me, that I impart to them. Now they become that cell group, and that cell is living in behind the walls that nobody knew what they're doing.
They are forming cells on our soil. They are networked, they nurture and meet together in mosques for their meeting, for their plotting. When people hear about Hamas and Hezbollah, they think Hamas is 8,000 miles away now. That's Israel's problem. People don't realize that of all the terrorist organizations that have set up shop on American soil in our country, and the top three are Al-Qaeda, Islamic Jihad, and Hamas. Hamas has the largest infrastructure on American soil. Hamas has cells in over 40 states in the United States. Hamas has cells in New York, in Massachusetts, in Washington, D.C., in Laurel, Maryland, in Potomac, Maryland, in Herndon, Virginia, in Raleigh, North Carolina, in Boca Raton, Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in Cincinnati, in Oklahoma, in L.A., in San Diego, in Santa Barbara, in San Francisco, and everywhere in between. And that's only Hamas. Houston alone has 65 mosques. So the infiltration of the American society is beyond belief. People don't realize that Hezbollah has 11 cells on American soil. Texas alone has 25 Hezbollah members, identified but out by our government as terrorists. Al-Qaeda and Hamas are working with the MS-13 gang, the notorious Mexican gang, in smuggling terrorists into our country using the Mexican border. Al-Qaeda is paying between $25,000 to $50,000 per terrorist to be smuggled through the Mexican border into the United States. Hezbollah is doing the same thing. They are sneaking into our country, and they are immediately going to the major Arabic cities, major Arabic population in our country. They are going to Houston, Texas, Dearborn, Michigan, Miami, Florida, Washington, D.C., New York, and Los Angeles. They are marrying American citizens who are Muslims, who are related to Hezbollah and terrorists in the Middle East, who have American passports, and they are literally breeding terrorists on our soil.
Why is permitted to the Muslim to marry an infidel woman? Because they can convert her to Islam. The Muslim today trying to get through that world, through the women world, to all the European countries and American countries to invade through the women. More women are coming to Islam than there are men.
What Islam is doing is it's managing to take the West by marriage.
When I married Muhammad, after several years into the marriage, him and his two brothers, all three married American Christian women. And it kind of surprised me because I would think they would want to marry the traditional woman from the Middle East. And so when I asked him why would him and his two brothers, all three, marry American Christian women, he addressed me and said, well, if we cannot take this country by force, we will take our time and take it through marriage.
In the countries in Europe that I've traveled to, France, Germany, Britain in particular, we've noticed a trend where Muslims go out of the way, Muslim men go out of their way in order to court and marry Western women in order to get them, of course they've got to convert to Islam, and then the children must be brought up as Muslims. And one can't help but believe that this has an evangelistic goal in Islam. It's got a goal in terms of jihad, because it seems from many of the writings that we've read of Muslim scholars that they are encouraging the Muslim men to do just this.
One thing that is part of jihad also is to marry non-Muslims, converting them to Islam. That will guarantee you a good deed as a Muslim for heaven.
Islamic imams are teaching and encouraging and admonishing the Muslim young men to go into Western countries, to get Western women as as wives, to have them converted to Islam and to raise the children as Muslims, and that in this way what they see is that they can take the West by marriage, they can take the West through the womb.
The seeding of jihad, which is doing the other cleansing by seeding their children in other infidel women, now they can rise up a new generation which is carried on the Islamic spirit and Islamic look.
This is something that's systematically being done now, converting Americans through marriage.
Polygamy in Islam is actually considered by many Muslim scholars to be a tool or a weapon of jihad, of holy war. It's recognized as one of the 8 forms of jihad by having polygamy.
American women are sent to Mideast, paid $40,000, and they sent to Mideast, and these women will marry some, a Mideastern guy, and he would come here. And this guy is trained for jihad. He is trained to kill. He is trained fighter. Now he has residency through this woman. And now, after he become resident and he become almost a citizen of this country, now he would bring a wife from there. He would divorce this wife in America.
By having many wives, what this is helping to do is strengthen the armies of Islam by providing a disproportionate numerical advantage against others, that Muslims can have more wives, more children, faster, and therefore outnumber their enemies quicker.
By the American standard, he can divorce her, but yet in a Muslim world, he has not divorced her yet. And he will ask for the second one, and he will marry her in America, and the third one, and the fourth one.
The average Muslim has 4.5 children per wife.
While Western nations are having a declining birth rate and in fact are decreasing in numbers, the Muslim immigrants are having a very high birth rate and are increasing in numbers. So in places like Germany and France, the Muslims are growing at a spectacularly fast rate, while the Western nations' indigenous populations are actually decreasing.
Man in Islam can marry 4 wives at one time, and we think, oh, that's not a problem here in the States. No, that's not going to happen. They can't marry 4 wives, but they do, because if they're married in a mosque, how are they going to know that they're married to more than one wife? And I've seen it firsthand through my own personal relationships that they're marrying more than one wife.
A Muslim can marry 4 women. In Europe, it's happening in one form. In Mideast, happening in another form.
A man can have up to 4 wives, and in addition to that, he can have something called pleasure marriage, which is a temporary marriage. A marriage contract that can last for a few hours, whereby he can marry a belly dancer that he's attracted to, and it doesn't have to be recorded in the legal system. All you need is one witness. It could be a friend.
When a Muslim man marries a real wife, now there's several different forms of marriage. There's a muta marriage, which is a one-night stand marriage. It can be as little as 24 hours to be married, and they can have as many of those marriages as possible. I call them concubines or one-night stands. They call it a real marriage, and they actually just do a little prayer with the woman, and the woman, why not? And everything's okay between them and God. So they can have as many of those as they want. But to have 4 wives, a wife they would actually take into the mosque and do the wedding ceremony, like I had a wedding ceremony with the certificate, they can only have 4 of those at one time.
We have come across the example of temporary marriage. Muslim soldiers come into a village in the Christian South and they take temporary wives. They call it a temporary wife. And their wife must live with them while they're there. When they move to another village, they have a divorce. That's not a temporary marriage. That's nothing other than somebody being forcibly raped or being made a prostitute. But there is no concept of marriage here. They use the word marriage, but they don't have the concept of marriage that you get in Christianity or that any Westerner would recognize as a meaningful marriage.
They can have, here in this country, 4 wives. It's recorded in the mosque. It's not recorded in the State Department.
Under Sharia law, it is taught that a man may divorce his wife by mere verbal pronouncement, by 3 times saying, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. That's the procedure. No paperwork needed. Mere verbal pronouncement can finalize the divorce.
All it takes for a divorce is, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you.
The woman does not have any similar rights to freedom from the man.
A woman can't divorce her husband in Islam. The husband can divorce the wife, and he can divorce her for anything.
when you have 4 wives at a time, when you can have concubines as well, when basically a man cannot commit adultery. Adultery is just a crime that a woman can commit. So Islam's whole concept of marriage is very much a chauvinistic, Saudi Arabian, 7th century religious concept. It is 7th century Arabian culture. It is not something that can translate into other religions or be acceptable in the West today.
Muhammad had 12 wives. His youngest wife was 9 years old.
His third wife, Aisha, was in fact 6 years old when he married her and 9 years old when he consummated the marriage, according to the Hadith. This is the Muslims' own holy writings. This is not something some Christian has written about Muhammad, but this is the Muslims' own authoritative holy book. It even describes in the Hadith how Muhammad, when he took Aisha into his wedding tent, how she carried her dolls with her. I mean, it's pathetic just to try and visualize this poor child being abused by a much older man. What Muhammad is teaching is that women are lower life forms. Women are, as he said, the majority of the inhabitants of hell are women, because women are deficient in intelligence and the women are deficient in religion. And so Muhammad taught a very contemptuous view of women. And you can see it even in his own life.
The women's right in the Muslim world is really not strong enough. It's not on the side of the women. The woman she's not important in the Muslim world. You know, as Muhammad referred in the Quran, she's your ground. You do whatever you want.
Women are made for the man, and the man can do what he wants with them, and they are a field for the man to plow in any way he wants, quote unquote, from Muhammad.
Women don't have the same rights as men. The testimony of a woman is not the same testimony of a male. It takes 2 women to testify for 1 man. Why? Because the Prophet Muhammad said woman has half a brain. So it takes 2 women to equal the testimony of 1 man.
Under Sharia law, a woman really has very little rights.
Women don't have property rights at all. You know, in a way, what 1 man receives, it's equal to 2 women.
A Muslim girl inherits half what her brother inherits. It's always less for a woman under the Muslim Sharia law.
Under Sharia law, a woman's testimony is not valid in court against a man's. A non-Muslim's testimony is not valid against the Muslims.
Sharia law, I believe, is very oppressive to women. This is a 7th century law that the Arabian Peninsula tribes lived under.
In many Muslim countries, time and again, women who are victims of rape end up being condemned by the courts and stoned to death, or killed, buried up to the neck in sand and stoned to death. All kinds of executions such as this, simply because of Muhammad's teaching that a woman's testimony is not valid in court against a man's.
In an Islamic world, if a woman is raped, if a Muslim woman gets raped, you know, she have to furnish 4 witnesses, that these witnesses saw that this man raped her. If she could not furnish 4 witnesses, then you know, the Sharia law rises against her. She is condemned by Sharia is a liar. But on the other hand, the man, if something happened, if this woman came and accused him, you have to furnish 2 men and say, I did not sleep with her. I was sitting somewhere else with these 2 men. And so therefore, the court will take the side of the man before it takes the side of the woman.
Under Sharia law, a man's testimony is always to be taken and a woman's testimony is to be discounted.
A so-called honor killing happened in northern Iraq.
If a woman did something, one thing or another, a woman will be, the father will invite the entire neighborhood, the entire family, and he will put her in his you know, footsteps of the house, and he'll slit her throat. And by slitting her throat, he cleansed the family's name right there. That's permissible to do that cleansing for the family's name. But on the other hand, if his son did something, the father will not kill the son.
Islam has a very low view of women, a very low view of marriage. It can be argued that Islam has no concept of marriage at all, but only really a license to mate.
A woman under Islam is basically less than an animal. She is completely the property of a man. She has no say-so over her life.
Women have no value. In fact, in many places in the Middle East, men still pay more for their horses than they do for their wives.
Under Sharia law, a woman cannot own property.
A Muslim woman after marriage, when she is married, her father wants to make sure that his property and his daughter's property does not go to a second, third, or fourth wife and her children.
Under Sharia law, all the children of the marriage belong to the husband. The woman has no such rights.
The children become the property of the father under Islam. They must become Muslims under Islam.
Under Islam, it teaches that a man may beat his wife. Now, there's no authority for a wife to beat her husband. A man may beat his wife. In fact, he should beat his wife with a stick. Muhammad taught this.
I did experience all types of abuse, from physical to verbal, even to sexual abuse. So it was very prevalent in the religion. Again, it wasn't a weekend thing, and I never say all Muslim men beat their wives. I've never lived in all Muslim men homes, nor do I say all Christian men don't. But I do say abuse is wrong, and in Islam it says and encourages, if a woman is out of order, to correct her by beating her.
Muhammad also taught that a man is to beat his wife regularly with a stick. So beating your wife is taught as acceptable in Islam.
In Islam, it's encouraged to beat the wife if she is in rebellion. It wasn't like Muhammad would beat me every single weekend. But in Gwinnett County, in the county that I lived in alone, I had 6 counts of abuse filed in a 15-year period. It sounds like nothing, but if anyone understands an abuse victim, they don't file a complaint every time we get pushed or hit or shoved or beaten.
If a Christian man or a Buddhist man or an atheist man or anybody goes into court because his wife takes him in there because he rapes her, he abuses her, he kills her in the name of honor, that man, if he was not Muslim, will be thrown in jail and charged with a crime. But a Muslim man is given a free pass because under his Islam, his wife is his property. He is allowed to beat her. Actually, the Quran goes in detail on how long of a stick you can use to beat your wife under different circumstances.
وذكر البعض الآخر بأنه يضربها بالسواك وفسرها البعض الآخر بأنه مو المقصود السواك بقدر المقصود إنه العصا تكون بغلظ السواك.
People ask, well, why did he beat you? Well, this is over stupid things. One time I put a carpet in the wrong place. Was not where he wanted the carpet. And I was standing at the top of the stairs looking down. He got angry because I'd put it here instead of here, and he knocked me down a flight of stairs. Another time is he couldn't find the coffee, and so I got...
The United States have
slapped and knocked down because of the coffee wasn't in the right place. So it could be anything that set them off. Even if I ask any questions like, where were you last night? You see, I was not allowed to ask the questions. He could ask me 20 questions for where I'd been all day long, but it was never my business where he'd been all through the night.
We should not stand for human rights abuses, for disrespect of women in our society, because we are a Western society. If those Muslims do not like our laws, do not like the way we respect women or we elevate women into the same place of a man, then maybe they should not live in Western society.
If the West is going to allow Sharia law to rule, even rule Muslims, it means they have allowed cruel and unusual punishment. They have allowed the discrimination against women. They have allowed the second-class citizenship of others.
The Muslim Middle East has the least amount of freedom and the worst oppression, the worst human rights records imaginable anywhere.
When we see in America today that Muslims are going to courts and they are asking the courts to not intervene in domestic abuses or domestic problems because they want to settle it under Islamic court, you have a man in a Western society who beats his wife, who beats his children, who abuses her, who rapes her, and when she goes to court to defend herself, the Muslim lobby groups are coming in and saying, no, we need to settle it under Islamic law, under Sharia law, because these are Muslims.
A true Muslim who wants to obey Sharia laws cannot function in America. Sharia law is not compatible with democracy.
You cannot bring democracy to a Muslim society for the simple reason they do not have the worldview in which to support it. And this is one of the tragedies that it appears many people in our State Department simply never understood, that you cannot impose it. There has to be a worldview change before you simply impose a political structure.
Islam is not just a religion. It is a political system that discriminates against many people. If the West accommodates this under freedom of religion, they are accommodating an ideology that rejects democracy.
Also available from Carroll Productions, The New Barbarians, training children to kill. Shocking, informative, eye-opening. It offers deeper insight into Islam's plan for world domination. To purchase this and other informative resources, visit carrolltv.com.